Welcome. I'm Pat Sheridan, Director of Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery. We are here today to hear from Janice Lessman-Moss and her wonderful weavings that we have on the north wall of the gallery. A little bit about Janice. She has an MFA from University of Michigan, BFA from Temple, and she is most recently an award winner of the United States Artist Fellowship. Congratulations. She is a multi-time award winner for the Individual Excellence Award of OAC. And a little bit about Janice. She's a professor at Penn State University, as you can see, art and textiles, just up the road a bit. And I would say extraordinarily talented, and what a wonderful room to have you there with all of your experience and the work that you create. Janice creates complex weavings that begin as digital compositions and are accomplished. Actually, you know what? I'm going to let you talk about that because you're the pro.
Okay, all right.
But really and truly, there's a lot of depth behind the work, and you'll get to know quite a bit about the intersection of math and art, which is the nexus that created this exhibition, Thread Count, which will be up until July 6th. So without further ado, Janice, thank you for coming to
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's such a pleasure to be a part of this really interesting exhibition. And of course, I love to think about the intersection of math and art. I always tell my students whenever I introduce the course at the beginning of the semester that weaving is about a combination of logic and imagination. And I truly believe that there is a real depth of connection to method and order when you work with weaving, as well as, of course, then having fun and creating the kind of visual relationships that you're interested in. So I prepared a presentation today that is basically giving you an introduction to the work that I have in the gallery. I have several weavings here, and I thought it would be interesting. When you look at the work, it's hard to tell exactly how they're done. So my idea was to give you a sense of the background of the work in relation to that combination of the digital and the material. So I put in a picture of me weaving primarily because, again, the loom is a fairly mysterious tool, and but it involves the relationship, or it is a device that is used to connect two sets of elements. The threads that are on the loom, which is the warp, and that's how taught in a very kind of ordered sequence. And running perpendicular to the warp in the loom is the weft, and you can see that I have a big shuttle that is holding the weft threads that I am going to be inserting through the warp threads that have been raised strategically to create the pattern, the design that I have programmed into the computer, and my loom is a digital loom, so it is weaving what I wanted to weave. But regardless of the fact that there's a real kind of mechanical aspect to the process, there's a real digital aspect to the process, a virtual aspect to the process. To me, it combines the best of both worlds, and that is the digital and the physical. So this is me designing on the computer, and that's what I do first. I work out my ideas, I generate my ideas, my compositions in the virtual world of the computer. And it's a really great environment in which to work because it gives you a lot of flexibility. I can work with all kinds of relationships of lines and shapes. And although it does take time to work on the computer, you can change things fairly quickly. And the thing that happens that is oftentimes very exciting about working on the computer is that you discover things through the kind of the way Photoshop works, which is the program in which I work, the way things kind of reveal themselves unexpectedly through the layering process, again, in the virtual world. So it's an exciting process to me. But, again, that connection of the virtual, the digital, and the physical, I still have to weave the pieces, and I love the physical engagement with the process. And here again, you can see the warp threads on the loom, and they're very kind of organized, and you can see all of those gray devices there. Those are called petals, and they hold the threads, and they lift the threads according to the way I've programmed the design. Right below my elbow, you can see the picture of the computer screen, and that computer screen has the design, the drawing that is going to be created that I'm working on right now, and the computer talks to the loom, the looms raise the threads according to my design, and then I manipulate the threads as I insert them through this space right here, which is called the shed, so that negative area, that's where the weft thread goes in, and what you see appearing on the surface is, when the warps are down, is the weft threads. It's a binary process, so either the warps are up or the warps are down, and when the warps are down, the weft shows. When the warps are up, the warp shows. So that's basically it. And that binary process means that actually they do say that the jacquard loom, or the design for the jacquard loom in 1804, around there, was the precursor to the personal computer because it is built on that binary language, ups or downs, zeros and ones. And I love that kind of analogy. So it is a perfect kind of output device, the loom, for my designs and for any kind of design. What I do when I am beginning to work on my ideas is I develop what I call templates. I develop a series of these templates. This is done on the computer in the virtual world. And in fact, though, because this is binary, this can be read by the computer, the loom, excuse me, the computer is sending the message to the loom. This would be read by the loom. All of the black marks in my design would mean that the warp is lifted. That's what the loom reads. Black means warp up, white means warp down. So when the warp is up, any of these black areas here will mean that the warp is going to show. Any of the white areas there mean that the warp is going to stay down, and the weft will show. So whatever color I have running in parallel to the warp will be what is visible. I develop my templates. So that's one template. This is another template. I have tons of templates that I develop just for each piece. And all of them are structural. You see that they're based in circles. I'm very interested in that relationship of the circle and the square. I think that it has a lot of metaphoric kind of connections. We think about heaven and earth. We think about male and female, kind of the dualities of complementary relationship of circles and squares. And it's interesting to think about the circle because, of course, it also contrasts dramatically with the loom threads. The warp and the weft, they run perpendicular, so you're getting the grid. So I'm building from the grid, and I think the circle is a nice foil or, again, complement to the grid. Another template. This is actually based in a traditional weave draft, and I don't know if any of you are weavers in the room, but this is a waffle weave structure. And sometimes I do work with a lot of traditional structures, but this is one that I really enjoy. It has a really wonderful dimensional quality as well as visual dynamic energy because of the angles that are created through the structuring process. This is another template that I will have on the computer. This is in color, so this is not weavable. But this provides me with a matrix for laying out my design. So you can see here that I say it's the foundation for orchestrating my composition. And this is where the math comes in. Everything that I do is kind of based in this foundation of very simple geometric shapes. And what I try to do as an artist is to build upon that basic structure an interesting relationship of ingredients that create a kind of sense of mystery, complexity, and really engage the viewer in kind of puzzling out this relationship. So you can see I select some of these shapes randomly, but they're based kind of in a methodical order, moving from the top to the bottom of the composition, but they are random. So I've got that organized system that provides the foundation, and then I allow chance or serendipity to be part of the equation, just to make it a little bit more human and a little more exciting. More weave structures that are then imposed upon some of those shapes that I'm kind of mapping out on the surface. Those are weavable because they're black and white. I'll cut other sections of weaves virtually and put them into this, again, layout that will be read by the computer. So I took those waffle weave structures there, and you saw that I had a full composition of those, and I cut them strategically and put them in some of those spots. Then I'm putting some of those other weave structures, those other templates that I designed, into this puzzle or this map, and I fill it all in. Then I create another template because I want to do some other things to elaborate on this, and this has outlines on my shapes. You can see the outlines, but again, everything is based in an underlying order. So I don't just draw lines, and none of the work that I do involves any kind of drawing on the computer. I work with the tools, iterative capabilities of Photoshop to do all of my mark making in Photoshop. And I still feel like I'm very involved as an artist, even though I'm not kind of drawing. I look at this as just computer-generated drawing. So I took some of those pieces of lines, and I'm installing them kind of under some of the layers. And they, again, are not weavable because they're red, right? But then there's little black dots in those white areas now, so that is weavable. And I will continue to elaborate on that. And here you see, I did put some more lines on top of that. This is loom ready. This is ready to go to the loom to be woven. That said, of course, I have to put a warp on the loom, and I have to dye my wefts. But nonetheless, this is ready to go to the loom. Because my loom is a certain width wide, I have to weave two pieces together. Because if you've seen in the show, this piece, I think these pieces are about 25, 28 inches wide. And my loom weaves 58 inches wide. You saw in those initial pictures how the loom is quite wide. So I have to put these two together. So I did two full compositions in the virtual world. I put them together. Now they are ready to go because they are black and white. They're binary. They're either going to lift the warp or the warp is going to be staying down. And here's a picture on the loom. So one of those compositions on one side, the other composition on the other side. And you can see that I did have two different colors of warps because I wanted these pieces to look different. But I do have one weft color that's traveling across the entire width. So remember, when you see the black in the design, what happens? The warp lifts, so you either see turquoise or you see this kind of chartreusey color. And then where the white is showing in my design, you see the weft, and that is this kind of purple color. And those are the two weavings. So if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, they're on the far wall, and this is what you'll see. And that's the pieces finished. I'm going to take you through the trajectory of another piece that's in the exhibition. And this piece, I'm kind of starting off a little later in the process, because after I have that black and white design constructed, I need to know before I dye my yarns to go onto the loom, what colors am I going to use? And what color am I going to use in the warp? And what color am I going to use to intersect with that in the weft? How do those two things work together? Again, the exciting thing about weaving, and if you've woven, you know that that intersection of the warp and the weft creates a wonderful kind of quality of color blending. It's that optical blending because you have these small dots of one color intersecting with small dots of another color. Very exciting. So that said, it's exciting, but it also sometimes doesn't, you can't tell for sure what's going to happen with that color that you decided to put in the warp. When you put another color with it in the weft, what's it going to do? How are they going to interact. So I do play around with that considerably before I'm ready to start doing my dyeing and getting my loom ready to weave. So in this example, I have a kind of a fuchsia colored warp, and you notice in the ground, in the weft, you see some black here in the center, and you also see some green here on the sides. So in this example, I actually have a kind of a changing of color across the field. But watch how the design changes as I am working through variations. So again, once I have that map done in black and white, I want to know what it's going to look like with the color. And is it going to do what I think it's going to do, or is it be as interesting as it was in black and white when I have the color added? And I think this might be the final design. And so here again, I've decided that I really like. It worked out in color the way I thought it was going to. So I am at my computer, and I am finalizing the blueprint for the loom, and that is my black and white cut file, which the loom will read. And again, you can see kind of in the corner there behind my computer the loom. It's a big metal device. It doesn't look like a traditional loom at all. It's called a single thread control loom. It comes from Norway. And there's a computer, a little laptop computer that is next to the loom. And at this stage, you can see my fuchsia warp on the loom. So I've got my dyeing done, and I'm finalizing that blueprint, and I'm getting that ready to go onto the loom. I have my warp dyed, but now I have to dye my weft. So this is actually an ancient technique called ikat, whereby I wind sections of the weft threads, and I bind them tightly with a specialized kind of resist tape. It's called an ikat tape. And this thread was originally just natural, and actually I have some right here. So this is just natural linen, and I take the natural linen and I bind it with the ikat tape. So I'll pass this around. You can feel the tape, and it is very tight and secure, because what it needs to do is resist the dye from penetrating here in these areas, and it will insert it into a black dye, as I did here, and whatever is loose is dyed, and whatever is covered with the tape will not be dyed. And then once I have that done, this is on my drying racks in my studio. And then once it's dry, I remove the tape, and you can see the areas that I have bound. That's the natural color of the linen that's remaining, right? So I have that linen there. And in this instance, what I wanted to do was kind of paint color across the width in a value gradient, or maybe a little bit of a saturation gradient of greens, so that it's a little bit brighter on the edge than it is in the center. And this is going to be placed across the width of the loom very strategically to create a movement across the field. Here they are then finished dyeing. It's very hard to tell the differences, but you can see a little bit lighter green here on the edge, and then it gets a little bit richer or darker in the center. This one's a little less successful. I actually didn't want to change the color. I wanted to just change the value. So it's very subtle. I don't usually like to have things really pronounced in the weft, because there's so much going on that you have to be very careful that you don't have too much competition. I like complexity, and I like kind of mystery, but I don't want it to be just too jarring or too difficult to look at. You can't make sense of it. So these warps are ready to go on the loom. And here they are being inserted on the loom. I have my drawing there, so it reminds me of what I'm actually going to have. And again, you'll see this weaving in the part in the gallery, but that is the intersection there of the warp and the weft, the warp being that kind of fuchsia magenta color, and then the weft being inserted across perpendicular to the warp to create this color contrast. Another thing, I'm going to introduce another concept here at this time, and because when I insert the weft thread, I don't just stand there at the loom and throw my thread across and throw it back and throw it back and throw it back. You saw in that initial slide, or one of the beginning slides, where I was kind of picking up the thread a little bit in the weft. That's manipulating what I'm referencing as the random walk movement that I'm creating across the field. So I have those ECOT resisted areas, right? So there are little spots of black and there are little spots of green. And I want those to move across the field in a way that I feel creates another kind of path or pattern down the length of the weaving or the length of the warp. So when I put my thread in, and it's really hard to see, I have the green section kind of moving in one direction for a while, and then it'll move in the other direction, and then it'll move in the other direction. But that means as I install the weft into the weaving, I have to be very, very conscious of how I insert that weft thread. That to me is very exciting because it engages me in the physical process of making. And again, I have an example here of that shifting. Can you see that here? Maybe it's a little bit more evident. This is on the back of this weaving. And you see that little white area? So that white area is a resisted area on that ECOT thread, like I showed you. And I move it. So as I'm putting one thread in, I'm aligning it a certain way, and the next thread then goes over a quarter of an inch. Then the next thread in goes over a quarter of an inch. The next thread, another. The next thread, another. So that it creates that angular movement. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So that is, it's called a shifted weft ECOT. But for me, I'm relating it to the concept of the random walk, which is a mathematical theory, which they say is used to predict things as diverse as growth in nature and the stock market. That's what mathematicians do. And they use this kind of random walk formula. And I have looked at the random walk formula. I have a mathematical friend at Kent State, and he teaches in math, and he showed me a program that they use to actually figure out the random walk, to figure out the stock market. I didn't want to get so involved in the numbering system that they use, but it was enough to say that it's just a physical movement, so that's kind of sensible in this. I think if you are a quilt maker, the parallel is with the drunken path. That again, that's some kind of a disordered movement. So here I am at the loom. That's me on the other side. This is the threads from the back of the loom being lifted. And so you get to see how really kind of dramatic it is. And the mechanical aspects of my loom, it's a really big metal device. And this gives you a little better sense of that random walk movement because that's the shifting of the weft. And you can see how the edge of the weft gets very erratic and messy because of the way I am installing that weft to get that random walk movement. It's very subtle, and you can go over and look at the pieces after this talk, and you can see if you can find the random walk in that weaving. Sometimes it's easier to see on the reverse. Do you see the black movement's probably easier to see than the green? And it really looks random, doesn't it? I mean, it's, even though I kind of am mathematically or strategically placing each of those weft threads, there's a lot of room for variation and human error, and the dyeing itself is not so exact, nor is my installation. So everything is just a little bit shifty as a result, but that is exciting to me because it contrasts with everything else that is very kind of controlled and ordered. And this is the front of the piece. Again, it's a little bit hard to see the random walk. A lot of times you can see it in some areas, you know, you squint at it and you see a little bit of a black movement or a little bit of a green movement, but it's not meant to be visible like it was in that sample I showed you. It's really meant to just add another layer of complexity to these really rich systems. And as I said before, you know, they're kind of like maps, they're like puzzles. All the pieces are based in the same kind of matrix, and yet they look different, but they all kind of fit together because they're rooted in the same basic foundation. But it represents kind of the complexities of the world in which we live, trying to kind of balance things, put things together to kind of make them work as a whole. So that's what I do. Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you know, I can see your header. You've got all of these ends on the side because of the way that you're shifting the left around.
Yeah.
How do you manage those things?
Well, so this is an example of what the weaving looks like when it's finished, right? So I have all that mess. And if you go and see the piece in the gallery, I actually cut those. I have this piece here, which is not a piece where I use a random walk, but you see how that's cut. I use a rotary cutter, and I just cut them so that they are even. There is a structural pick, a structural thread that goes in there to make sure that I hold the works in, which is necessary, otherwise the threads would just kind of fall off because there's nothing holding them in there. But, you know, that's always the issue. Have you done ECOT before?
No.
Okay, because it's again, that traditional process in Japan, and it's such a wonderful process, and I love the results. But then you always have ugly ends, and you know, what do you do with those selvages? They have ways where they kind of tuck it in periodically and just make it work from the point of view of craft. But it's hard to do that, and it makes for a very bulky edge, so I just cut it. And I like the perfection of that. And I like being able to just see the edges, too, that you have that kind of almost like a little fringy edge.
That structural line that you talked about at the edge of the ECOT, do you have to individually tie that, or is that something that you can machine?
When I weave, and I don't know if you noticed at any time, I'm actually going to go back here to here. You saw in that first picture that I had of myself weaving, I had a big shuttle with me. Remember that, the image at the beginning of the photograph? I had that big shuttle, and I can go back to that one too. These are the structural picks. So this is a very fine thread, and this is a very fine thread. And you see, because I've got the space here, the divider between the two pieces, I actually am going back and forth with this thin thread. That's the structural pick. And I will use that when the shed is open, when the warps are lifted. I'll throw that over there, and then I'll throw this one over here, and then I have that big shuttle that is going all the way across. And this you can see is kind of also a random walk in there. See how it's shifting? So that's shifting in that field. And that is on a big, big shuttle.
So then,
That.
are you cutting down the middle?
Yes. Yeah, I did. So I took a rotary cutter and I just took them apart. And this is, interestingly enough, that is the random walk. And you can see that is the sample right here that I was just using for demonstration purposes. So those little areas that are resisted, they don't look like anything when they're wrapped in your shuttle. It's like, you know, you can't tell that there's going to be any order that comes out of that. But it's up to me then, as I weave it and throw it, I've got to kind of get those aligned. And that's why, when you saw in that, I am actually trying to get those threads to line up. You can see that resisted area there. and I've got to see where it is and align it. So it takes time. I'll throw it across, and then I have to kind of, move it, and then I'm ready to go on to the next pick, and I have to move it again, so that it makes the kind of movement that I'm interested in.
So how long does it take you to do just the design process for, say, the piece that you held up right there?
The design process, usually I spend a couple weeks maybe doing the designing. And then once I spend a couple weeks doing the design, then I say to myself, well, what color do I want to make it? And then I go into the dye lab, and it'll take me another week to dye the warp. And I usually dye, I'm sorry I don't have any more images here, but I usually dye the warp in sections so that I can weave. I actually wove those pieces probably on the wall there. I have had it divided into two sections where part of it's yellow and part of it's green. And then at the end, I might have had a fuchsia warp, and then I have a section that's painted blue. So I do several pieces at a time, because once I get, it's so hard to thread, and it just saves time. So once I have the first color, usually once I have the colors on the loom, then I get excited about what color weft I'm going to use, because I can see it. The colors in front of me, I look at it and I say, what's going to look good with this? What's going to spatially do what I want to do? And then I start doing those color designs. And then I go back, finalize the design, and then I'm ready to go. So it's usually 3-4 weeks before I have the design done, and the dyeing done maybe a month and a half. I mean, I teach full time, so it's hard to find time in the studio, but I am persistent. It's a weaving is such a laborious process that if you don't chip away at it, you don't get anything done. So I have to chip away at it too. And I just put in a couple hours every day, and I eventually get my work done. But all that is very exciting. Then once I get started weaving, it'll probably take me about 2 to 3 weeks to finish something. I started a piece yesterday, so I'm really excited. And once you get all that on the loom and you see it starting to be, to evolve, to grow in front of your very eyes, you see this evolution. It's such a pleasure to see things grow. And, I talk about the random walk, and I make that analogy with the mathematical theory, but I also am a walker. And I live in Kent, and I walk to work or ride my bike to work, but I'm always walking, and I think walking is such an exciting opportunity because it gives you the time to think and also to observe. And the world reveals itself slowly because you're moving through it in a linear way, slowly. You're not in a car, you're not moving fast, but there's so much that kind of evolves in front of you very methodically and very slowly. It allows you to contemplate, and I feel like that same thing happens when you're weaving. It aligns with that kind of movement. I am actually moving at the loom, but while the piece is progressing in a linear way, it is like going up for a walk. And you see things kind of revealing themselves to you and unfolding slowly as you move through this space that is just kind of coming and wrapping around. So it's a really exciting, the whole process is very exciting, from the designing to the making. I just really enjoy it.
No credits. What took you down the road towards working with the Jacquard thing?
Well, actually, I blame that on my responsibilities to school. And I don't know where I would be today if I wasn't the head of the textile program at Kent State, where I had an opportunity to purchase this digital loom. I had put it on my wish list for years. We need a digital loom. And then I found out that we were able to buy a digital loom. We got the resources. And I thought, oh my gosh, I know how to use this. I had been using a digital doggy loom, but not a digital jacquard, a totally different animal. So I'm panicked, and it was the end of the year, May, and she said the loom was going to come in September. So I had to learn over the summer, and I did. Just perfect timing. I immersed myself in a class and learned how to weave digital jacquard, and totally fell in love. I love weaving of all sorts, and I teach all kinds of weaving because that relationship of work and weft is just where it's all happening. That grid provides the foundation for all kinds of explorations. But I do really like the jacquard because of the opportunity to create more complex shapes and more layers. So I have just immersed myself in that, and I've grown and grown, and now I have my own loom. We have 2 looms, digital jacquards at Kent State, and then I have one loom, and actually, thanks to the United States Artist Fellowship, I'm getting another small loom this summer, so I don't have to weave across the whole width of the loom. And if you're a weaver, then you know you don't have to use your whole width of your loom, right? This one you do. If you don't, I'd have to unthread it, and it's so much trouble with thread that I always keep it threaded. And I figured, yeah, why not? If I got the whole loom threaded, I might as well do 2 pieces or 5 pieces. Sometimes I do 5 little pieces together. So I just take advantage of it. But I am excited about working with just one small piece on a small loom. I think that'd be really cool.
What's the difference between the jacquard and the dobby?
Between the jacquard and the dobby? Good question. And actually, the heddles are different because each one of the heddles on a jacquard functions independently of all the other threads. Okay? So on a dobby loom, a jack loom, countermarch loom, all those looms are shaft-based. So everything works, all the threads work as a team. That's why you get repeat pattern. Complex patterns, no doubt, but you get pattern. With this, you can do anything you want. I mean, I can take a picture of your face and I can weave it. I can take a flower and I can weave it. And without the kind of labor that would be involved in doing that with the traditional tapestry technique, as you know, of course, you can always do anything in weaving with enough time and patience. But the jacquard allows you to do those things more quickly. It's really exciting. Yes?
What brought you to textiles and specifically weaving in your life?
Well, I actually was a printmaking major in, I studied interior design. I have an associate's degree in interior design because I didn't know anything about being an artist. I didn't know you could be an artist. And then I started to work for a gallery, actually. I'd gone to 2 years in school, and I thought I need a break, and I need to decide what I'm going to do with the rest of my life at the ripe old age of 21. So I started to work at a gallery in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. And it was a contemporary art gallery, and I fell in love with art, which I had no experience with real live art. And again, I didn't know that you could have a career in art. And so I fell in love, and then I also fell in love with my husband because my husband was at the University of Pittsburgh at that time, and I started taking classes at art at the University of Pittsburgh. Met him in a class, a printmaking class. We got married the next year, and we went off to Tyler School of Art together, and both as printmakers. And he in turn turned into a painter, more of a painter and a drawer. And I took a textiles class just out of curiosity. This sounds interesting. What can you do with textiles aside from wear them? And again, being very naive, and I think that's often the case when you're young. You don't understand how techniques can be used for kind of meaningful expression. And I just fell in love. And so I was doing all kinds of paper making and wrapping and net making. And again, then I got my job at Kent State University right when I graduated from graduate school in 1981. And I was the weaving teacher. So I had to learn how to weave. I knew how to weave. And I don't need to be flip because I did know how to weave. And I loved weaving. But the more I do it and the more I learn about it, the more I love it. There's so many things that you can do with that process. It is a technique that takes a while to really understand. I think anything does. You know, you have a kind of a cursory knowledge of things when you just try it for the first time. But the more you know, the more you understand the language of the process and how you can use it to, you know, create something that's more meaningful, that's more expressive of your own individual perspective. And so it just holds tremendous interest for me. And, you know, I just hope I have enough years left to do enough things that I want to do.
I have another question. When speaking to people that are viewing weavings, what is your recommendation for approach to a weaving so that someone can comprehend the style of or historical context? Do you give any kind of pointers for folks so that they come away with the greatest understanding of that particular weaving that would be helpful?
That's a really good question, and I have, you know, kind of two different thoughts, because one thought is that don't look at it as a weaving, or forget that you know, don't put up blinders. And I hear that too often. People say, well, I don't know anything about weaving. Like, well, I don't really care. If you look at my work and enjoy the visual relationships, the textural kind of variations that are apparent in the piece, the compositional movement, it's like any other visual object. So you know, it's like a painting, it's like a sculpture, it's like anything that hopefully has enough visual information that it excites you about looking at it and might invite you to you know, interpret it in your own way. But that said, right, I don't want people to exclude looking at a weaving because they don't know anything. I do feel that I'm very proud to be part of that heritage and that kind of history of weaving. So I call myself a digital weaver. I call myself a weaver. I don't call myself, I mean, I am an artist, but I don't call myself an artist. I'm a weaver. And I like the language of weaving, and it really is important to me. I wouldn't be making the work I make if I didn't weave, because it's all based in structure. And, you know, there's something to me that's really intimidating about approaching a blank canvas or a blank piece of paper. That just mystifies me. You know, how you think about what you want to do if you've got a blank piece of paper in front of you. But you've got those threads, and they're all organized, and then you've got these threads, and they're all organized, and you've got to put them together. So it's like there's that basic foundation is already there, and that to me, that's exciting. And you know, it's that building that metaphoric aspect of the making with textiles is, you know, the inherent order and all of the kind of you know, poetic associations that you have with that. It just, there's so much there already that you can build. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It answers a part of it. I also wonder, you had a question, please go ahead.
Yes, but it's outside this, so if you want to finish.
I was going to say, you know, historically speaking, weavings were one of our first
Yes.
experiences of art in the home,
Yes.
of storytelling,
Yeah.
of also having a function
Right.
of keeping spaces warmer.
Right.
So when you see yourself in the history of art, is that something that you like to talk about, or is that not, is that something that comes into play at all?
The associations that I make most specifically with weaving is, you know, it's the first portable art. And you think about historic tapestries made for the castles, and you know, they were moved when they needed to be moved. They did keep the place warm. They kept it acoustically sound. So I don't reject those kinds of associations. I don't you know, work to achieve those, because I think the other thing is that in our culture, we're not so aware of the relationship of weaving to communication. And truly in the Africa, in Southeast Asia, in many cultures of the world, weavings were made to reflect in the ceremonial kind of celebrations, right? They reflected life passages, so they had meaning, symbolic meaning, whether it was because of imagery, narrative kind of pieces, or whether it was because of patterning, but they were really important within the culture as communication. So they were not necessarily worn or put on the floor. They were oftentimes just hung on the wall during a particular celebration because they communicated something. They connected people. So there is a history of the work being used in a more kind of artistic or symbolic situation, which I tend to connect to more. And in America, we don't really have that. We have coverlets, which is kind of like our history, and they're beautiful, and the images are great, but they weren't made for function. So it's a little. I think you have to understand, or I wish that everybody would take an interest in learning more about other cultures of the world. And I think maybe we are opening ourselves up, broadening our horizons to what has been done historically in other cultures. Hopefully. Yeah.
So perhaps my question is more related to this one. What is the role of living within the arts? So it's considered most of the craft than in art. And the way you were talking, right? It's like, paper is, but the material is what draws you.
Right.
And that, do you perceive being marginalized towards the craft? You are not really an artist, you are, a craft one. So can you just talk about your impressions after a very successful career in leading and your perception of that?
I mean, that's absolutely true. And the hierarchy, the weavers are down here, and especially because traditionally it's also been women's work, right? So women working with a craft, it's not taken seriously. I get that question all the time and from my students, and of course, my feeling is, we have to prove them wrong, or we have to prove that we deserve to be viewed in the same kind of exhibitions and in the same way, critically evaluated as any other art form. As I said, I look at what we do as being totally valid. It's a different language, but it is something that is visually and symbolically very poetically very communicative. So I oftentimes feel like it's your problem if you don't look at weaving, because there's a lot going on that you're missing. Of course, that said, I'm still not in the exhibitions where paintings are.
No, because I think that is where the history comes
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Right?
But I do feel like now there's a lot more interest in getting away from the traditions of the white male patriarchal modernist aesthetic and history. I think we are starting to understand that people from all races, all backgrounds have made art, maybe not art with a capital A, but they have made art, and they've been expressive, and they've been educated. They're making good quality work. It's not like they just do it as a little pastime. And so I think that the world is opening up. That's my hope. I think the only way things can change is, again, to make good work. And we just hope that people will recognize the value of it over time. Annie Albers, just had an exhibition at the Victoria and Albert. No, it was at the Tate. And, who would have thought? So the exciting thing about recognizing, and everybody's saying, who knew, that she was doing such beautiful work. Here she is, just the wife of Joseph Albers, and she is a legitimate artist in her own right, using that language of weaving that nobody thought was valuable. So that was exciting, and you feel like if that lays kind of the groundwork for change, it'll slow, but I'm hopeful that it will. Yeah.
And teaching,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And this is what
absolutely.
you're doing. So how many main students do you have in your program?
I have a lot of students. I don't have a lot of majors.
No, main
but-
students. Are they mostly female students?
Yes, but you'll find that across the art school in general. Even in glass, traditionally male-associated fields, there's more women in the arts now, in arts education, than there than males. And again, I don't know whether it's kind of been happening, and it's a little bit more pronounced right now. I maybe have, just as I'm saying that, I usually have like one guy in a class. Last semester, I think there were 4 men in the textile studio, so maybe we are seeing a trend towards, engaging more men in the field. It's mathematical, and if you want to be kind of sexist about it, if men have traditionally been more acclimated towards working with the sciences and working with math, that's a way to kind of bring them into the studio, is to say that there is a certain amount of logic in there, and that you find a correspondence with that.
So I really appreciated the fact that you made the connection of your walking with the random walk.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a nice connection to be made from the historical storytelling of life.
Yes.
And your current day experience of life in respecting and drawing out the beauty of serendipity. So thank you so much for your conversation and the time you've taken with us. You make beautiful work, and we're so happy that you're in this exhibition.
Thank you.